Good evening, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome into another YouTube live show here tonight. John Kurtz with you. We're going to continue exploring tonight some of the ACC fallout and how this could actually be pushing us closer toward a Super League. Now, I will preface that by saying I am not naive enough to believe that it's happening anytime soon. Of course, this is a discussion about what happens at the end of the decade / the beginning of the 2030s. But The Athletic, not me, The Athletic has suggested that what has happened in the ACC with its settlement could push us closer to that. So more on that in a moment. Also, we've got something fun that I kind of wanted to do here because I saw that Josh Pate had a discussion about who is the most hated team in college football. And unsurprisingly, I think probably to most around here, he pretty emphatically declared Texas was the most hated team in college football. Who's the most hated team in the Big 12, though? Coming from Big 12 country, I wanted to relate that back to this league because I think I have a controversial number one. I think number one v. number two is a really interesting discussion. And I'll be really curious to see what the reaction is to it and what you guys say. So I've got the top five. I know the graphic there says most hated Big 12 team. I've got the top five. This is some good offseason talk, but it's not the offseason for basketball. And it is a big March coming up for the Big 12. Big 12 tournament is next week in Kansas City, which is great. I'm excited about it. But the real story about this conference is going to be written once we get past this week in the Big 12 tournament and get into the NCAA tournament. And I want to reflect on what the Big 12 needs to have happen this March and how it is another part of why and how college athletics is so much more stressful these days and how much is riding on the outcome of every game, much more so than it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago in all of these conferences. So we will discuss that. What else did I put there? Oh, yes. And on that front, good old Greg Sankey is beefing with, Danny Cannell, but also via Danny Cannell, he's beefing with Ken Pom. All right. So we've got Greg Sankey versus Ken Pomeroy. Ken Pom, the czar of all things college basketball analytics and statistics, a very smart man. So who you got? You got Sankey or Ken Pom in the cage match? We'll talk about that as well. All right. You guys know the drill. If you've been here before, I appreciate everybody that is here. But fill up the comments as you roll in. Please make sure that you like the video as you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate that as well. You can leave questions or comments in the chat, but if you want to guarantee that your question or comment makes the show tonight, you can create a super chat to do that. Click the $ below the chat box in order to do that. And it will not only make sure that you get on tonight, but it'll support the work I'm doing to bring you this content on a regular basis. So greatly appreciate everybody who does support in that way. Okay, John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you're not watching live and you want to submit a question or comment, you can do that there, and I will kick off the next show with it. So again, John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo to do that if you have questions or comments. And subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. That is the best way to support what it is that I'm doing. If you say, hey, John, love your content, love your work, what do I do to help you out? Subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter at ofbnews.com, totally free. You can also click the link in the description of this video and just follow it that way. With one click, join 3,500 plus other Big 12 fans who are subscribed. And I appreciate each of you who do that. Totally free. Cuts through the noise of the Big 10 and the SEC, gets you the Big 12 news. You need to know how national stories affect the Big 12. It's all right there for you. And like I said, 3,500 plus can vouch for that. So thank you, everybody who is here. If you want some John Kurtz merch, I've got it in the merch shop. There's a link in the description of the video to follow that. If you want some John Kurtz merch or some Open for Business merch, another way, obviously, to support the channel. I'm looking at the chat. Who people think is the most hated. It's interesting, very interesting. And that's what I figured. It's what I figured most people would say. Before we get to that conversation, which I am very much looking forward to, there continues to be fallout from this ACC settlement. And look, I was not expecting this to be a part of it, but I was reading through a story on The Athletic written by Justin Williams, who I believe used to cover Cincinnati or perhaps still does. The national guy now at The Athletic. Anyway, really like his work. But some of the fallout from this whole deal could be pushing us closer to a college football super league. Of course, in 2030 and beyond, when you have the TV deals starting to come up, like it will take a while to be able to make this happen if it does. But I think that's a lot of people's question right now is like, what does it look like then? Because there's so much talk about Florida State, Clemson getting the lowered exit fee, which is a part of this. Because, of course, the settlement gave the ACC something it wanted, which is relative stability for the next 5 years. You're not going to have teams leaving because the lawsuits are dropped. Lawsuit could have potentially said grant of rights doesn't mean anything and teams could leave right away. That's not going to happen. In exchange, Florida State and Clemson get some more money in the near term via the brand and success initiatives. More people watch your games, more you win games, you get more money, taken at the expense of some of the lower tier teams in the conference. So they get the short-term money and they get the exit fee dropped to as low as $75 million by the time 2030 rolls around. So that's the nuts and bolts of the settlement. And we've explored a lot of the tentacles of that. One of which was, hey, unequal revenue sharing seems like something that will probably be copied by those in the Big Ten and or SEC. In fact, I continue to reference Josh Pate, but a very connected guy. I heard him say again on his last show that that has been discussed in SEC and Big Ten circles. Like, there may not have been reported publicly, but it is being discussed behind closed doors. Like, hey, how do we get that? How do we make that happen? Like, Alabama, Ohio State want that. They don't want to be making the same amount of money as Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Northwestern, etc. And on that note, that is the thing that, according to The Athletic, could actually push us closer to a super league. The fact that that was agreed to and turned out the way that it did, which was not always an inevitability, because if you've been following this for a long time, you can recall Florida State at one point was basically asking for that and was told no, and then lawyered up, got into courts, and lo and behold, they wind up getting it anyway in the long run. So here's what Justin Williams said in The Athletic. He's talking about super leagues, and Project Rudy specifically is the one that's going to be mentioned here. But he says, in regard to that, making inroads across the power conferences remains a challenge. Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti and SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey were very dismissive of the super league concepts last fall. And any genuine progress on something like Project Rudy would likely involve a change of heart that gets those commissioners on board. So, okay, at this point you're saying, John, what is this? We all knew this. They said, hey, we're basically super leagues already. We don't need any help. What has changed here? Well, here's the line, okay? Here's what Williams said. He said, but unequal revenue distribution could be the tectonic shift that sparks it being Project Rudy. And a reason he is saying that is because Project Rudy, a core tenet of that was unequal revenue sharing. It would be broken down into different tiers, and depending on what tier you're in, you would get a different cut of the money, which they hypothesized would be bigger if they were selling the TV rights to this big 70-team entity, which is what Project Rudy was pitched as. Now, maybe it winds up being not quite as many teams. We'll see. But they had kind of pitched the initial idea as 70 teams, and that would fetch a heftier price tag overall. And then the bigger brands would get an unequal share of that. So those teams that are bigger brands and having more success would get a larger share of that. Williams says, despite confidence within the industry that conference revenues will continue to climb, and an insistence by Petitti and Sankey that they don't need any outside intervention, the combination of guaranteed minimums and a higher ceiling could incentivize programs of all stripes to buy what a super league is selling. So the combination of guaranteed minimums, which, so there would be a guaranteed minimum in terms of revenue as well for the teams that are not up at the top, and a higher ceiling then for the teams like Alabama, Georgia, Texas, your big brands that could generate a lot of interest up top there. A little more on that if you're still wanting, hey, John, like, what are some of the details here? Well, it would take a $9 billion investment. So this would involve like some private capital, private equity. But a big tenet of this would be less matchups with like small G5 teams. So this is not good for the G5 at all. Not good news at all. You would have way more power conference matchups, which is a part of generating extra TV interest and getting that number up. So more high-profile matchups, tiered performance-based revenue system. Most successful programs are compensated well above what they can get from a conference's standalone TV contract right now. That's according to the pitch. We don't know if that would actually be true, but according to the pitch, that's what it would be. And then guaranteed minimums to all schools, 70 teams, multiple automatic bids for the SEC and Big Ten into the postseason, the playoff. It's kind of a quick rundown of Project Rudy. If you don't remember that, we had that story back in I think the last time we were talking about it was maybe like October. Now here's a quote. Okay. If you're still sitting here skeptical, like, okay, John, like one line in an athletic story, like, all right, fine. Well, here's a quote. Okay. There's a quote from Justin Williams' article where he talked to, who does he quote here? A power conference athletic director. So P4 athletic director says, we'll see if it continues to pick up steam, but I know more and more ADs have listened to the idea. There's a lot that needs to be done, a lot of egos that will have to be checked for it to really come together. But in theory, it makes sense, right? We'd all make a lot more money. So there's a power conference athletic director that seems to be on board with the idea that they would all make more money and says, hey, more of my colleagues are actually listening to this, at least. I felt like this was a big enough deal to lead the show because I got to be honest, I just sort of felt like, well, these things are just dead. I don't think we'll ever hear anything more about them. And to actually see a quote from a P4 athletic director sharing some optimism here and tying it to the idea of like, hey, unequal revenue sharing is going to become the new norm in college athletics. And so that will kind of open the door here because then everybody will be used to it. Like that will be the precedent that's set and that will get everybody more used to the new world that we're in. And so it makes sense to kind of slide back into that. And then hopefully, if you have a big 70 team league, like I know it talks about using the existing power conferences still already in its format, maybe there could be some reshuffling back to something that makes more sense geographically once you have that all locked down. We'll see. But this was more, this gave more credence to the idea that I thought we would see, at least at this point. There are a lot of things here. If you wanted to say, well, John, what conference is this P4 athletic director actually from? Because that could make a big difference. If this is an ACC or a Big 12 athletic director, it very well could be somebody that is trying to push some hope here, for this being the thing that happens instead of just a more exclusive Big 10 and SEC Super League kind of model at that point. Or just, the Big 10 and SEC grabbing however many more teams, 4 more a pop, and then calling it good in 2030. Yes, that is very fair. So that's a distinction. I do not know who this is. I don't have the answer for you on that. But the Athletic, I know some of you will trash it. I don't think these guys would be writing it if it's something that's just completely nothing. Okay. So I'm at least having my eyes a little bit more open here to like, all right, we need to keep our eye on this. We need to keep our eye on this. What's going to happen with the Super Leagues as we start to get toward the end of the decade when we'll just hear more and more about where things are going, what's going to happen with Florida State, Clemson, everything going on in the ACC, but then broader picture for college football, how much momentum will this continue to get? Here's the rest of what Williams said. He said, that's an important factor. This is brewing at a time when universities, so he's referring to the money. The last part of the quote said, we'd all make a lot more money. Says that's an important factor. This is brewing at a time when universities are scrounging to supplement their already 9-figure athletics budgets. The $2.8 billion House versus NCAA settlement, which has a final approval hearing scheduled for April 7th, is set to usher in more than $20 million per school in annual revenue sharing directly with athletes. So, okay, he's basically saying, look, that matters. If they can make more money, that's a huge deal because they need it. They need the money. Which is very true. Like you look at every move that's being made right now, whether it's courting private equity, whether it's the All-State 12 and thinking about renaming the conference, they are turning up every couch cushion they can possibly find, they being the leaders in college athletics, to try to get some more money because they desperately know that they need the money. So if this is a legitimate, that to me would be the bigger key than anything. Like money talks. You say all you want about the egos, and that is true. I mean, there would be people who would have to drop their ego to ever get to that point, namely like, the SEC. But if there is more money in it, the big brands can get on board, and then that's probably going to be your decision, right? If you can sell to Ohio State, Alabama, whatever, like, hey guys, this will be an extra $15 million a year for you because the gap will widen because you'll make more money than everybody else in this tiered system. If that's legitimate, every decision being made right now ultimately has come down to like, it's cash grab. What's going to get us more money? What gets us more dollars? And so I feel like stands to reason that the money piece of it would be the biggest piece of it. Anyway, I'll keep you updated on that. I will keep you updated on that. We'll see where it goes. All right. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you are in here. Let's check the audience. A lot of people on Twitter folks. I know you guys like to read your news. Subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com, to do that, or click the link in the description of the video. Would be great if you could do that. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video. I see this. I see, well, Immaculate, I don't know if this was you going back and forth with everybody in the chat. I should probably just chill on the chat here, but I see listening to an idea doesn't mean wanting it. If that is in reference to the Super League, I apologize if it was just me pulling something out of a random conversation. But I mean, I do think I'm making a distinction. I'm not saying anybody is like actually wanting this, but if they can legitimately get more money, I would just refer back to the point that I just made. If it's going to make everybody else more money, that's clearly driving literally everything right now. Would think it would have a shot. And I'm just going by people who are more informed than I, listening to more people saying that there are more people listening. And listening would be the first step toward maybe not even wanting, but having it happen. It doesn't even have to be what you want. Ask Utah how that goes. Utah did not want to be in the Big 12, but it happened. That's the world that we live in college athletics right now. Like, decisions are not always being made by like just what people want. Some of them are out of necessity. So that would be the point that I would make there. All right. So who's the most hated school in the Big 12? I'm going school. I guess some of this would depend on phrasing here. How are you going to school? I'm weighted heavily toward football, but I will just say school overall. Who is the most hated Big 12 school? I've got a top 5 list here because I saw that this has become something people are doing now. Top 5 most hated in college football. So I'm narrowing it down to the Big 12. And I think I've got a controversial number 1 here. So based on what I saw earlier in the chat tonight, I think I have a controversial number 1 when I first teased this. So hang in with me. Number 5 is tough. So I will admit, in doing this, I got through 4 that I think all were fair, had legitimate reason, and you guys will understand why they made the list. But I couldn't really come up with a good 5th. We kind of got stymied there. But the only thing I had, and I don't even know that this is fair, the only thing I had was I was like, well, when UCF first joined the league, the build-up period to them actually coming to the Big 12, that was a very brash, loud online fan base that very much thought it would come in and have a lot of success. And now UCF has been a bit humbled after the 2 years that they have had and having to change coaches after Gus Malzahn left, kind of a mutual parting of ways, it felt like, at the end of that. And so I don't know how much of that is really still left. And I may just be too online. I see much more of the online fan bases than many of you who might be watching this video. So I went with UCF, but it's like, you had options there. If it were a couple years ago, maybe Kansas fits in just because of the basketball program and people get annoyed with losing in Allen Fieldhouse all the time and lots of people complaining about officiating there. But it's basketball, which is weighted less heavily than football and all this. And I mean, Kansas is kind of down right now, right? Like, everybody's getting their shots in now, and that's been satisfying, I think, for people over the last 2 years, the people that do hate them. And so it's not burning as bright as it would be if they were still doing their normal thing and just winning all the time. TCU fans, this is where I have to take a step back and be like, is it just that I heard so many bad, like, horror stories of K-State fans traveling there the last time the Wildcats played in Fort Worth, and like the students being rowdy and, throwing beer on them and just being I don't know, TCU doesn't, like, maybe, again, I'm just sitting here like, maybe Oklahoma State's won a lot in this conference, but their fans seem pretty nice. I don't know. Mike Gundy's like a fun character. It doesn't really seem like there's a ton of Oklahoma State hate that's out there. Arizona State, if we're going by, who won the league last year. Arizona State won the league, but it's a cool story. They helped the Big 12 with some credibility by their performance in the playoffs. So I don't know. I couldn't come up with anything else there for number 5. So we're sticking with UCF, I guess, just sort of by default. And I feel like, by the way, UCF fans would kind of wear that like a badge of honor. So I don't think I'm going to take any any hate myself for putting that there. Number four, we're going with Texas Tech. Going with Texas Tech here. And this one is, it's all about the Benjamins. It's all about the Benjamins. More money, more problems. You become hated. But this is another fan base that I feel like would embrace this. Look, Tech's got a lot of money, and Tech's throwing that money around. They're getting a lot of attention with this transfer portal haul that they have for this year, and deservedly so. And they've got now, a very highly publicized multi-billion-dollar booster in Cody Campbell, who's bankrolling a lot of this and funding it. And Tech fans have been celebrating their what's off this offseason. They stole a coordinator from the Big 12, hired two really high-profile coordinators, kept their GM away from Notre Dame. Like, a lot of reasons for Tech to have some confidence and cockiness, dare I say it, by the way things have gone this offseason. But with that, you have a very, it's not a bashful fan base, a very online fan base that is very passionate, very large. And so you have a lot of online interactions where I think people have been like, damn, like, okay, look, Tech fans have generated some hate with that. And again, badge of honor type of thing, right? Look, I will just say this. Go rewatch the scenes of like Chris Beard in Texas entering United Supermarkets Arena when his return happened, and look at that fan base and tell me that that's not a fan base that doesn't generate some hate every now and then. And I'm not saying those circumstances made sense for everyone to be really mad, but like, if you're going to be that amped up about it, like you're probably a fan base that's going to generate some hate. And I think there are some people that look at it and like, hey man, like this little yappy dog, like hasn't won 9 games in a regular season since 2009, but is so yappy. Well, this is your chance to upgrade a little bit, become a Doberman, become a Rottweiler, something like that. You can do that this year. Got the money to do it, but there's money behind the brashness of the Texas Tech fan base right now. So I go with them at number 4. Number three, I'm going to go with BYU. And this is, I think, a polarizing one because a lot of people, myself included, I very much like BYU. I have loved everybody I have met, basically, that's been associated with BYU and was treated so well when I went to the BYU K-State football game. And they're just so nice. Like, I go back to the Avery Johnson quote when they played, K-State played there. And he was like, I'm not used to like fans from the stands, like encouraging me or like complimenting me. It was weird. Just very nice people, very humble. Kalani Sitake had the opportunity in the Colorado postgame press conference after the Alamo Bowl to like make a case for why they should have been, and they objectively obviously should have been more closely considered for a playoff spot, but he just didn't do it. Like, just very humble. But at the same time, a lot of people give him hate because of the LDS tie-in, right? Like the church, I have not talked about this specifically here, but I know it's gotten plenty of run on YouTube and everywhere, like the incident in Arizona with the Mormon chant that was thrown out there by Arizona students. And I know that that's not the first time. If you just Google it, you can see that like an Oregon football game a couple of years ago, it came up as well. Like that's always going to be something that turns BYU into an easy target, I think, when they are going and playing places and just in general, people's attitude toward them in general. There's also something too. Like BYU's been really good this year. Like, they're beating everybody in basketball, and they had a terrific football season this year. Also, if I want to broaden it out a little bit more nationally, they took a lot of hate nationally as a football program this year just because people thought that they weren't very good. So I took that into consideration there too. And I do remember that, always hearing about the fact that people in the Mountain West had some hate for BYU because they got annoyed with how old the roster was with players who had been on missions. And like, I can remember hearing a little bit of that when BYU came into the Big 12, and some like warning, like, oh, they'd be a pain of a partner to deal with, the not playing on Sundays thing too. But like, I think everybody who's been paying attention would say BYU's been nothing but just a great partner. So it's basically a polarizing option there at BYU, but they have some things naturally that are always going to get them some hate. Now, number 2 and number 1, this is where the controversy comes in, folks. This is where the controversy comes in. who's number 2 and who's number 1. I feel like most of you could probably figure out who the top 2 are that are left. I know you guys know who one of them is. And I'm going to go with them at number 2. That's Utah. I'm going with Utah at number 2. Now, Utah had a top 2 spot locked up in the top 2 most hated teams in the Big 12, like 9 months before they even stepped foot into the conference, or before the ink was dry on the paper of them coming to the Big 12, that was August of 23. That was a done deal 9 months before that because of how Utah acted in the build up to it. Not thinking the Pac-12 was going to die, fighting with Big 12 fans over that, calling it the truck stop conference, thumbing their nose at the entire league in general. Then you transition into, all right, they're actually coming here, and it amplifies into a swell of like, well, we're going to dominate this conference. We will run the Big 12. We're picked to win the Big 12 in the league preseason poll because we are just going to rule the roost here. You guys are just a bunch of schlubs here in the Big 12. That attitude was everywhere. Then Utah goes 5-7. And I think the thing that contributed more than anything was the performance that Mark Harlan had in his post-game press conference after the Holy War this year, where he not only goes after the officiating, but particularly the part where he said, hey, we were excited about being in the Big 12, but I'm not excited today. That little quip at the Big 12, I think, drove more hatred for Utah than anything there. So you got this combination of like fans who are way too cocky and then also pretentious. And that's what has made Utah so hated. And then you have the athletic director going out of his way. This was not like some pre-scheduled press conference, going out of his way to take a mic and then kind of just breathe life into this whole attitude that the fan base has had before. So yeah, I think about Texas and this like pretentious attitude that Texas had, like we're better than you. Definitely some of that with Utah. Now, having said all of that, I know you're all sitting around like, hey, man, like, how is that not number 1? How is that not number 1? You guys are all wrong, by the way, in the chat. You guys are all wrong. Your guesses are the most wrong, and I don't think you're going to think this is that stupid when you hear who it is. Because the difference between my number 2 and number 1 here is that Utah is the most hated school within the confines of the Big 12. If we were doing like a straw poll of Big 12 fans, I think Utah would win handily. But if we were doing a straw poll of people nationally and said, hey, which school do you hate most in the Big 12? Who's the most hated school in the Big 12? Nationally, that is Colorado. Okay. So it's a tough decision between 1 and 2, but I literally went with like the sheer volume of haters. And if we're talking about the sheer volume of haters, there are far more Colorado haters nationally than there are Utah haters nationally. So that is why you go with Colorado. I think you guys know the obvious here, right? Like Coach Prime, very much a lightning rod figure. Lots of people hate his attitude, how he conducted himself coming in right away and saying, hey, you guys are leaving. I'm bringing my luggage and it's Louis, like get out of here. Going crazy in the transfer portal. Basically he was just a disruptor, and disrupting the status quo in college football is going to get you a lot of hate. It's going to get you a lot of love too. And again, when we talk about polarizing, Colorado definitely fits the bill there. Very polarizing, very, very polarizing. And so because of that, they're number 1. Not only that, people then hated, okay, we gave this program way too much attention based on what they were, especially in year 1. I guess they were technically in the Pac-12 then, but gave this program too much attention for what they are. People get annoyed with that. It's like Notre Dame, people get annoyed with that year in, year out sometimes. Obviously not this year as they made it to the national championship game, but some years like, why are we paying so much attention to them? They're not that good. And the other thing is to kind of the cherry on top with this was just the Heisman. I mean, how much hate was there for Travis Hunter getting the Heisman over Ashton Genty? There was a lot. That discussion got very contentious by the end of the season. So I'll throw in here too. I see some of the comments like, well, this is really people hate Coach Prime, not Colorado. I mean, they hated Travis Hunter by the end of it too, which is sad because it was such a phenomenal player and it had to turn into this or that thing with him and Ashton Genty, but there was a lot of hate there for just the whole operation. Shador, we still have, go look at the comments when you see somebody produce a report about what someone in the NFL thinks about Shador Sanders. They had a lot of figures that were making people hate them. I think it's fair to say that Colorado would be number one right now. So nationally, number one Colorado. Big 12 wise, you would go number one Utah. But for the purpose of this list, I go with number one Colorado. But let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments what your list would be. Am I right? Am I wrong there? Like the video, subscribe. Please double check. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you are not, I would really appreciate that if you did that. And also would really appreciate if you subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. You can find the link in the description, or you can just go to ofbnews.com. That's ofbnews.com. Very easy to get signed up there. Totally free. 3,500 plus Big 12 fan subscribers. And John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you would like to leave me a message there, question or comment, I will read it to kick off the next show, so you can be a part, even if you are not watching this live. And you can find merch, my merch store. The link is in the description of the video as well. So the Big 12 tournament is this week, and to me, it's a little anticlimactic. Outside of, speaking of haters, I know you guys love to hate on the court that Brett Yormark greenlit, which, it's something. It's something. We got to see it at the Big 12 women's tournament this week. Anyway, the Big 12 season is going to be determined by what happens the week after this Big 12 tournament and the weeks after, right, with what happens in the NCAA tournament. So that's really why a lot of this is kind of climactic for me. You look around and think like, man, this is going to, I think it's a pivotal March. I think it's a huge March for the conference. It's just that not much of what happens in Kansas City will matter. In fact, I'd love to be able, for the Big 12's sake, if you're thinking about what's going to be good for the conference as a whole, I'd love to be able to just say, hey, Houston, why don't you guys just sit down and take a break? You won the league by 4 games. Just sit down and take a break. Rest up this week. Don't worry about playing. Like let somebody else win the tournament. It'll be fine. Let's make sure that you're healthy and ready to go. Same with Iowa State. Iowa State's been dealing with some injuries, guys in and out of the lineup. Keyshawn Gilbert didn't play again on Saturday. Iowa State, you guys rest up. Go take your 3 seed and call it good. Go fight from there. BYU, you guys have been on a roll. What is it? 8 straight wins at this point. You guys have been on a total roll. Rest up. Get ready. Go be potentially a 5 seed now, according to Lenardi, a 5 seed, and go do damage in the NCAA tournament. The Big 12 needs to perform well. Last year was a disaster of a tournament for the league. The Big 12 had nobody in the Elite 8, which is still staggering to me to remember and go look up as I was going and looking. I looked it up like 3 times when I was doing my research for the show today, because I was like, man, I thought that's right, but it seems so crazy that after the year that the Big 12 had last season, where people thought, it was like a historically good conference, to not get one team into the Elite 8, it was brutal. And this year, then, it was backed up with a pretty average regular season. I don't think the Big 12 has been bad, but by Big 12 standards, it's been pretty average. And a huge thing, I hate to put all of it on Kansas, especially in a league now that has Houston and Arizona, Baylor, who recently won a national championship. But if Kansas is going to be down like this and Kansas is going to wind up as a 7 seed, then that's going to hurt the league. That's going to pull the league down a little bit. Bill Self's worst season is going to hurt the perception of the league nationally. Just the way it is. It would take Houston a long time, I think, to totally usurp Kansas as the team that's going to be kind of the barometer by which the conference is judged. That's still KU, and KU barely finished above 500 in the league, right? And Baylor, for that matter. I just mentioned their national championship winning program, one that's been really consistent, and they're going to be in, but wound up finding themselves kind of on the bubble this year. And it's been a down year for the Bears, where they just have never really fully put it together or felt like they were in sync. So there's a lot on Houston, man. There's a lot on Houston. Iowa State, Texas Tech, Arizona, get some deep runs going. This needs to be a better year to regain some of the reputation back for the league. Houston, I love, and I think has a very high floor in the NCAA tournament because of how tough they are. Like that's, they don't need to be making shots to go out there and win an NCAA tournament game, which, I do think if you're a team that relies heavily on shot making, that can be very dangerous. Obviously, if you just catch a night where you're cold, can you grind out a win? I don't think any of us, not a single soul, has a question as to whether Houston can just grind out a win in a situation like that. But then do they have the shot making? And I know they're statistically a very good 3-point shooting team, but do they have the shot making in an NCAA tournament format to have the upside to be a national championship caliber team, Final Four caliber team? We'll see. I mean, I think they do. But I would be lying if I didn't say I have some concern about seeing them get into like a regional final game or a regional semi where they aren't shooting it well and that becoming a problem. They'll be in the game, but in terms of getting over the hump and winning the game. And then you've got, BYU, a little bit more like, hey, that's a team that can just rip the nets. Will they catch a night where they're going to be a little bit more off, and what exactly does that mean? But BYU, I do think, is very much capable of a deep run, especially, if you're starting at a 5 seed, which it looks like may well be the case right now. Again, if you go look at Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology, that's where BYU's at, man. They're playing their best hoops at the right time. And I love a team like that going into March. And I feel like we've seen this in the past where teams do that and then they get hot in their conference tournament and maybe win the conference tournament, get to the finals, something like that. A lot of times then it feels like they fall off a bit in the NCAA tournament. That's why I kind of just want to can we just bottle it up and save it and then say, hey, go to the Big 12 or the NCAA tournament. Don't worry about what's going on in Kansas City. But I suppose maybe BYU can play its way into a 4 seed, depending on what actually happens in KC. We'll see. Thing I do like about BYU, they're very balanced. Obviously, Richie Saunders is great, but then there's if you go look at their stat sheet, there's 8 players between 6 and 10 points per game. So it's Richie Saunders and then a bunch of other guys who will just fill in where they can. And that does afford you more if somebody's having a cold shooting night. They've got a lot of different ways that they can beat you and a lot of different ways that they can score. So I do feel like BYU is poised for a pretty deep run here and can play a huge role in getting the Big 12 back on track from a national narrative standpoint this year. Because when you endure a year, last year, it was frustrating, man. You think about what happened to the SEC this year in football, kind of like what the Big 12 experienced last year in basketball. You're supposed to be the king of the hill in hoops, and you endured a season where you didn't put a single team in the Elite Eight, and obviously nobody in the Final Four. You had to watch the ACC, who had been throwing shots at you, the entire year. That was the conference where you had coaches like Brad Brownell saying, well, the Big 12's rigged the system. They get everybody ranked really high in KenPom, and then they just play each other the rest of the year, and they all look like great wins, and we don't really know how great they actually are. Funny, the ACC is so bad this year, they didn't even bother to do the same thing to the SEC. More on that in a moment. But you had the ACC taking a bunch of shots. Well, and then ACC goes and has a tremendous tournament, puts a team like NC State into the freaking Final Four, and the Big 12 took a lot of, rightfully so. If you don't get a team past the Sweet 16 after having an insane non-con, and people are talking about you historically last year, you deserve to take some shots after the way things ended in the NCAA tournament. But you got to get it back. And it's because it's so high stakes now, man. It's so high stakes. You need this basketball product to be really viable. You need to be able to get top dollar for it, to squeeze every penny you can out of basketball. And it's why I've said a million times, Yormark has the idea to try and decouple basketball at the next TV deal if we're not going to some super league. Big 12 trying to decouple. You need that in your back pocket. You can't have multiple years of really losing a lot of ground as the best basketball conference, especially if it's at the hands of the SEC. That makes it all the more tough of a pill to swallow because the SEC doesn't need it. SEC doesn't need it. That just sprinkles on the ice cream cone. Come on, guys. You already got cookie dough ice cream with the chocolate sauce and gummy bears. You don't need sprinkles too. You don't need the best basketball conference. And obviously the way that we will determine these things, Even I say this in a hopeful way for the Big 12. SEC's had this historic regular season in basketball, but if they flame out in the tournament, that's how we will remember it. We will remember things by the NCAA tournament much more so than anything else. Just like I always say, on the football front, if you're trying to earn more respect, you got to do it in the college football playoff. You got to do it in the college football playoff. Like, that's the way you earn respect there, much like in basketball. It's basically NCAA tournament or bust, for better or worse. And sometimes that's for worse, I think, in the way that we judge certain coaches, because the tournament it's hard and it can be a crapshoot. But you definitely want to find a way to up the reputation of the league again with what's happening here. And there's even we're seeing a little bit of pushback on the SEC, and it's basketball season, which is what I want to get into next here. Okay, I will remind you real quick. Please take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not. Those of you, I see a ton of you on Twitter. If you're not a subscriber to my Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, which is totally free, subscribe at ofbnews.com or click the link in the description of the video. If you hop on over to YouTube, just search John Kurtz on YouTube. In order to do that, I would really appreciate it if you guys supported me there. It's totally free. Cut through the noise in college athletics, get news that matters to the Big 12 and how the big national stories affect only the league that you care about in the Big 12. So, okay. Look, the SEC had a phenomenal regular season in basketball. There's no denying that. The Big 12, for instance, went 2-14 against the SEC in non-conference play. And the SEC had a winning record against every other Power 5 conference, dominant record against everybody except the Big 10. They were 10-9 against the Big 10. You add that to, they've already got the best college football conference. In general, I know last year I would not agree with that statement, but in general, they've got that. So it's a tough pill to swallow for everybody in college hoops right now to see that the SEC reigns supreme. But do they actually reign supreme is the question that I will ask here, because one of, if not the smartest mind in college basketball has now raised that question. Should we be asking this more? And it seems to have gotten under the skin of one Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, right? So when I say one of the smartest minds in college basketball, I am referring to Ken Pomeroy, Ken Pom, Mr. Pom, as I sometimes lovingly refer to him as. But look, go to kenpom.com. Great site. Been a member there for years. And it's what the stat heads like, right? I know some of you out there will hate it, and some of you out there look at me like I am incredibly rudimentary because, like, I look at Ken Pom. I know enough to be dangerous, but I don't live, eat, breathe, and sleep it. I will go to Bart Torvik occasionally, but I'm not. I keep myself at a point where I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not overly stat guy. So both sides of the aisle may be looking at me a little bit crosswise there, but I very much respect Ken Pomeroy and Ken Pom's opinion here. So he has weighed in on the SEC, which is about to get, by the way, 13 or 14 teams into the NCAA tournament. It depends on what happens with Oklahoma and Texas, who I believe are literally like the last team in and then first team out right now of the field. But the SEC is potentially going to get a record number of teams in here to the NCAA tournament. They've got 3 number 1 seeds. They've got 5 top 3 seeds projected by Lenardi right now. And as a conference, they have the best non-conference winning percentage ever. That's a hell of a resume for what the SEC has done so far this season. But Ken Pom raised the question, like, why aren't we talking about the SEC being a little bit overrated? Ken Pom dared to call the SEC a bit overrated. Now, here's his reasoning. Ken Pom says, if you remember last year, there was an unusually organized subculture of fans and analysts that criticized the Big 12 for being overrated and gaming the system in the weeks leading up to the tournament. It's kind of strange that no similar backlash has developed this season against the SEC, a league that seems to have unanimous support as not only the season's best conference, but the best ever. And indeed, based on non-conference play, the SEC has been one of the best leagues of the internet era, and therefore possibly ever. Conference produced the best non-conference winning percentage over that time and the best scoring margin since the 1997 ACC. I guess I should probably amend what I said earlier by that. Yeah, the era that Ken Pom has been tracking here, the SEC had the best non-conference winning percentage. just above 97 ACC, and then the point differential was like 18.2 for the ACC in 97 and 18 for the SEC this year. So they were very, very close on that part too. But Mr. Palm points out the 97 ACC is worth remembering, though. Theoretically, it was the best conference of the modern era, and yet its tournament performance that season was sad trombone worthy. Sad trombone worthy. North Carolina made the Final Four, but everybody else lost in second round, lost in Sweet 16, lost in first round. Then he points out the 2024 Big 12, which, I've already talked about here, but it wasn't good. Houston and Iowa State made the Sweet 16. Nobody else got past the second round. So Ken Palm says, we'll get to the data, but I think there's a strong non-data argument here about why a conference with extremely strong non-conference numbers is set up for tournament disappointment. So he's making the case here that conferences that do produce like this in the regular season are almost naturally doomed or naturally inclined to have a poor performance in the NCAA tournament, at least relative to expectation. And that could be something we talk about as well. What is a legitimate and fair expectation for everybody to have for them? But this, I think, is a really good point. And this is where, like, I really respect what Ken Palm does. And it doesn't take like a super crazy stat nerd to understand this. Any group of teams that collectively exceed expectation at anything in November and December are headed for some regression. Whether it's 3-point shooting, offensive rebounding, or just general performance, this is always going to be true. If we had another 2 months of non-conference action, the SEC would still be really good, but not quite as good as they looked earlier this season. It's just regression to the mean, right? I mean, you can get really hot at the beginning of the year, and you're probably going to regress a little bit. Like, throughout the year, we'll see teams go through spurts where they look great and amazing, but it's a long season, and it always comes back around, right? BYU was not always playing like the team that they are right now that has won 8 straight. There were long stretches of the season where they looked much more like a borderline tournament team. Now they're a 5 seed. That's just how it works. I mean, K-State, as bad as K-State was earlier this year, at 1.7-10, 3 games under 500, they then picked it up, and according to Bart Torvik, for 3 weeks played like the number 1 team in the country. Won 6 straight games. Neither of those was who they actually are, and there was regression coming after each one of those. So it does stand to reason, yes, if you overperform in the non-con, you're due for a bit of regression. But then by the time you hit conference play, and I guess this is the point that Brad Brownell and company were trying to make last year, then you hit the point where you can't really tell anything in conference play because, as the running joke has gone this year, I mean, you got to fight. The SEC went 500 in conference play this year. Shocker. But that's the reality because, yes, obviously you have to. And that's point number 2 that Ken Palm made. We really have no idea if conferences as a whole are improving or not after January 1st when non-conference play ends. So that's what he's saying. Like, hey, the SEC may have peaked too early. It's kind of, I feel like Ken Palm is saying the SEC might be the really popular jock in high school. Peaked a little bit too early. Maybe it's better to be nerdy in high school and then you come around in your 20s or 30s, making a bunch of money, doing great, lovely family. Maybe that's more BYU here, coming and turning it on late in the year, right? So Ken Palm's trying to say, well, that didn't sit really well with Greg Sankey, at least not through the filtered messaging lens of one Danny Cannell, okay? So Danny Cannell post the screenshot of Ken Palm's article, Why Hasn't Anyone Said the SEC is Overrated? Says the smartest man in basketball is saying out loud what I've been thinking for the past 3 months. And Greg Sankey felt the need to get on Twitter and do a little dunking, and shows that the 30-4 record against the ACC, the 14-2 record against the Big 12, that does hurt. The 10-9 record against the Big 10 and 185-23 in non-con games. So Greg Sankey, hey, I can't hate too much on that. I mean, it's hard to argue with a lot of those numbers. Now, that doesn't discount Ken Palm's point at all, because Ken Palm would turn around and say, well, Greg Sankey is actually making my point, in fact, here, by showing how much they peaked early in the year and how much they would be due for some actual regression based on that. So I don't think it really threatens him at all. But clearly, seeing that somebody is respected as Ken Pomeroy writing that and then having that filter out through different channels of messaging here is something he felt the need to respond to. Got under his skin a little bit. I must say, pretty impressive, Mr. Palm. Pretty impressive to get under Greg Sankey's skin. I can appreciate that. I'm surprised that Greg Sankey felt the need to take to Twitter. I'm surprised it wasn't just, a Peter Burns tweet. Like, that seems to be the Baghdad Bob of the SEC. Like, why did they not just slip him a note? Like, hey, go take this up. Go do the dunking on this one. That is intriguing to me. Sankey clearly feels it's very important. Look at Greg Sankey becoming a basketball man, showing you the importance of basketball now. He's got to take to using the Twitter fingers himself when it's precious SEC basketball that's on the line. See what happens in the tournament, man. We'll see what happens in the tournament. The good news for them, I feel like more so than having like the really high seeds, they've just got sheer numbers to throw at the thing, man. They've got 13 or 14 teams that are going to be in this field. It will be hard to not get somebody in the Final Four when you've got 14 cracks at it, man. 14 lotto tickets. It's like the NFL draft, Everybody loves having more draft capital, more draft picks, as opposed to specifically just high picks. If you just have more picks, you can throw all those picks out there. They're lottery tickets, something's bound to hit. The SEC, something's bound to hit. But we'll see. It would behoove the Big 12 to be really efficient with the 8 teams that it looks like are going to get in. It would behoove the Big 12 to do a lot better here this year. And then, pick it up next year. Kansas, come on, Kansas. Figure it out. Gotta get the Hawks going, right? Gotta get the Hawks going. Okay. I think I'm going to cut it off there. I feel bad that I keep pushing this story about Baylor Athletic Director Mack Rhoades. You know what? Maybe we can do Mack Rhoades. Maybe we can do Mack Rhoades here before I get out. We're still 10 minutes away from an hour. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate those of you who do that. Make sure you're subscribed to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com, or click the link in the description of the video. And you can find the merch link there too. And if you want to leave a question or comment on Venmo at John-Kurtz-4, you can do that. And I will kick off the next show with your question or comment. So if you're not catching this live, you can still be a part of the show. All right. So Big 12 has some real power. College football playoff this year. I feel like that's how you tease this, how you set this up. Big 12's got some real power in the room, boys and girls. College football playoff selection committee, not giving them nearly enough love last year. BYU kicked way too far to the curb, not even a part of the discussion, really. Iowa State, not a part of the discussion. Nothing beyond it just being a one-bid league. Well, now there's some power because, at least in name, Big 12's got the chairman of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee for the 2025 season, and that is none other than Baylor Athletic Director Mack Rhoades. So congratulations, first of all, to Mack Rhoades on the honor. He's replacing Ward Manuel. So it is funny. Like, I would not have been able to tell you before last year that Ward Manuel was the Michigan athletic director. But when these guys get forced where it almost looks like they're being held at gunpoint to talk to Reese Davis every week after the ranking show in late October and November, and they have to answer these like impossible questions. They're just put in an impossible spot on a week by week basis where the entire country is going to get mad at them. That's Mack Rhoades now. So he does have the unenviable task of having to do that, having to be the punching bag. He's got to go be the honorary punching bag for America and specifically college football Twitter to just crush every week. I mean, it's without fail. It's great, I'm sure, for ratings for ESPN and just generating conversation about this engagement, like we all talk about these days. It's great for engagement, but for the guy doing it, not very fun. And I'm not sure that it's really the best thing for the playoff overall in general, but it does create a lot of discussion and arguing, and we all get at each other's throats. Well, Mack Rhoades will be at the head of that now. He's one of 5 new members of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Mark D'Antonio, former Michigan State head coach, he's on it now. Maryland Athletic Director Damon Evans, Middle Tennessee Athletic Director Chris Massaro, Wesley Walls, former Ole Miss tight end, and former ESPN sports writer Ivan Maisel also added. So I know you'll look at this and say, well, John, what does this mean? Like, what kind of Does this matter? Is there any impact from this? Is there any power in this for Mack Rhoades being on the committee? I mean, I don't really think so. No, to me, as far as I can discern, really the thing about this is you are just the public face, and I'm sure there's more that goes on with it behind the scenes. But more as far as it concerns us, he just has to be the public face to take all the bullets and answer the questions. Now, maybe he does a great job. And if he does a great job and actually finds a way to make most people happy, there's no way he'll make all of Twitter happy. But if he can make more people happy, I don't know, maybe that does something for his personal reputation. I don't know that it's going to help the league very much. So maybe bigger feather in the cap, just career-wise for Mack Rhoades than anything else. I mean, it probably will even hurt him within the conference because inevitably, right? Think about this last year. If Mack Rhoades were the guy, he'd be up there having to answer questions about, what's going on with Ole Miss and Alabama, and why is BYU not even being considered there? Or he wouldn't even be talking about BYU. It seemed like really happened last year. There wasn't even that discussion. And then people are like, wait, we got a Big 12 guy up there. He can't even enter BYU into the discussion. Maybe you come back on the other side and say, hey, if our guy is the chair, one, maybe he's got a little bit more influence in the room, maybe, and can kick in some more BYU discussion, although they do have to leave, I think, when it's a team from their own conference. But maybe he can, or maybe it's just your own team. Either way, maybe he can generate some more discussion. And then even if it comes down to it, he can be the one publicly putting some pressure on everybody, because if he's answering the questions, you could publicly bring up BYU. Hey, if the room's not going to do it, I'll do it myself here to Reese Davis and see what happens. And if that can spur more conversation for everybody else, because I just said the one thing that these TV appearances do is add extra engagement and discussion. So if he puts it out there and people on Twitter start fighting about it, it's going to be more in the public conscience of everybody. And we saw how that worked last year, right? Everybody complained, the Lane Kiffin tweets and the selection committee and all that. And then it was talked about on, it felt like every broadcast from then on out, Sean McDonough is going on his soapbox during games about all the conversation about that. So it can, I suppose, actually have an impact on the public discourse, which maybe comes all the way back around full circle and helps generate more discussion into the room. So I guess I almost just talked myself into there. Maybe there is something to this. Maybe Mack Rhoades does have a little bit more of an opportunity here. I plant that seed, Mac. Plant that seed. Make sure you mention some Big 12 teams when you are being publicly asked about it when you're doing this. Would love that. One last note on this. I think about this. And this might be the last time. Might be the last time that you could actually use any of that influence. If there is an influence in that, if there is a truth to what I just said, that you would be able to milk a little bit of extra Big 12 discussion out of this because you've got the chair. This will probably be the last year that that's something that you can do, because after this, we're going to be living in an auto bid world, barring some crazy unforeseen circumstance. We're going to be living in an auto bid world, 4 for the SEC, 4 for the Big 10, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12. There's not going to be much work for the committee. There's not going to be much work for the committee. It'll be one at large. Maybe that's Notre Dame. Ranking G5 teams would be important, I guess, at that point. But it's going to take away a lot of the work of the committee, which was the whole point. That's what the SEC and Big 10 wanted to get away from. Wanted to neuter the committee so they can just guarantee that they're never going to get treated, fairly when they have a down year like this year with the SEC. So take your last shot here, man. Get in there. It's your last chance. It's your last chance. Mac, do it while you can. Do it while you can for all of us in Big 12 country. Best of luck to Mack Rhoades. Congratulations on the honor. And I look forward to getting angry and frustrated with him, but then hopefully being very happy with him on TV as well in October and November. Alan, what's up, Alan? Alan says, John, the SEC did peak too early. Big 12 will pass or equal SEC by the second weekend. We could have up to 4 teams in the Sweet 16, perhaps even the Jayhawks. Rock Chalk Jayhawk, Alan. Love the optimism, Alan. Love the optimism. It's going to be tough, man. It's going to be tough. They will have some teams with good draws. When you've got 5 top 3 seeds, Like I'm sure they will have 4+ in the Sweet 16. But let's go. Big 12, Texas Tech, Arizona. You guys listening? Let's get it done. Let's get it done. Let's have a nice little run here. Okay, in the postseason. As far as the Jayhawks go, we'll see. Hey, senior night, feel good win, good stuff there for Kansas. Maybe that gets them going. KU actually, most of the time, I feel like, Alan, the attitude about Kansas going into the Big 12 tournament is very much what I expressed early on. Like, hey, can I just take a break? Like, why? It doesn't really matter. This is actually a year where I feel like that could matter quite a bit. Like, just a team that really needs momentum to feel good about itself. They'll be playing in front of partisan crowds in Kansas City. I think that could actually really help Kansas this year and benefit them just to get the juices flowing and some real momentum. I'm feeling good about what they're doing at the end of the year, heading into the tournament. So just a thought that feels a little bit different to me with Kansas this year than most. Matthew, what's going on, Matthew? Appreciate you, Matthew. Thank you for being here. Said excited for next week discussing tourney seeds. March is hard to beat for the onslaught of basketball across the country. It really is, and I don't like how different the college basketball regular season feels now from like when I was a kid. And it felt like growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s that I just cared so much more about the regular season. And by that, I mean, like, I cared about a Duke, North Carolina game. I cared about, insert big national game here. I just have a hard time caring nearly as much about that anymore other than Big 12 games. And so it felt like the whole season was a bit more of a thing. And now it's just the tournament feels to me as awesome as ever, if not more awesome even than it was when I was a kid. But the regular season just drags. And I don't care as much about it outside of the Big 12. So when the tournament gets here, yeah, I dive all in. Very much excited for it. Very, very much excited for it. So I'm with you, Matthew. We'll definitely still be talking a little bit of hoops here. Definitely still be talking some hoops here as we go through the Big 12 tournament. So if anybody's traveling to Kansas City, safe travels. Hope you enjoy it. I think the weather is supposed to be great this week in KC. So get out and enjoy Power and Light down there around T-Mobile Center. Ugh, I hate saying that. The artist formerly known as Sprint Center. And report back. People who haven't been there, I'm telling you, don't knock it until you try it. Kansas City does a really good job with the Big 12 tournament. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com. Totally for free. Join 3,500 plus other Big 12 fans who do subscribe. You can find the link in the description of the video. Same with the merch link there. If you want some John Kurtz merch or you want some Open for Business merch, that is all there to grab as well. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Tell your friends. John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo if you want to leave a question or comment there, and I will get back to you with it on the next show. So with that, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Hope you have a great start to the rest of your week, and start to your week, and I will talk to you soon.